So here we have a match against Storm. I'm going to preface this by saying that my play is pretty medium, actually. I was talking to myself, kind of highlighting important points while I was playing, just sort of working on a style to let myself have a clear picture later to commentate over games about what I was thinking at the time. Anyway, this opening hand is okay. We have a little bit of built-in Blood Moon protection, which is nice in the dark against an opponent that could be playing literally anything. We have a cantrip, a piece of interaction, 3 lands. It's not amazing, but it's definitely a keep. Our opponent leads on a Spirebluff Canal and then passes to us. Our first two thoughts are, is it Phoenix and Storm? There's going to be some sort of blue cantrip on our end step out of Phoenix. Storm, most of their cantrips are sorcery speed, so I'm leaning more towards the Phoenix side, and if the cantrip of choice is Thought Scour, that essentially confirms that it is Phoenix. If it's Opt, there is still potential for it to be Storm. We play our fetch land and pass on our end step. Opponent opts, which doesn't really give us any additional information. On their turn, they fire off a Serum Visions, bottoming both, which is noteworthy, and then play the Pain Land, which doesn't confirm it to be Storm, but almost certainly means Storm, outside of some sort of weird budgetary restraints, but that's not really worth considering in a competitive context. They fire off a second Serum Visions, bottoming both once again, which we're pretty happy about. We're going to fire off our Whispers of the Muse just as a cantrip. It's not worth holding to gain the value. If you have it early, especially in your opener, just fire it off. On our next turn, we're going to play the island in our hand so we can have potential Growth Spiral up over the fetch or the swamp for Abrupt Decay. Growth Spiral is just probably going to be more relevant. If they go with a cost reducer, we'll just remand it. They pass through their turn after playing a land. We fire off the Growth Spiral, and they remand it. Really not a big deal. On our turn, we draw the Verdant Catacombs, and after thinking some, I elect to play it over the other lands with the intention of protecting myself from it still possibly being a Blue Moon deck. If they try and resolve a Blood Moon on their next turn, we can Growth Spiral in the swamp, fetch basic forest, Abrupt Decay, the Blood Moon itself, and then be protected with 3 basics and a 4th possibly off Polluted Delta next turn for basically the rest of the game. Have no problems with Blood Moon at all whatsoever. So by sequencing in this order, we essentially beat that plan out of that deck if it happens to be what they're playing, although I am still under the impression that we're playing against Storm. After doing nothing on our end step, our opponent taps 2 lands and places a Brawl on the stack. We are going to elect to Growth Spiral in a land in response and then remand. If they have 4th land in hand and tap out to resolve their Brawl after we remand it, on our turn we'll simply Abrupt Decay at main phase, and kind of sort of hope that's good enough. We'll be at the whim of a draw step, but we don't really have a better line available to us. If we let it resolve and Abrupt Decay it, if they then place a Ritual on the stack, with 6 cards in hand, it is not unreasonable that we will lose from that position, even if they only resolve the 1 Ritual reduced. The other possible line would be to let the Brawl resolve, and if they place a Ritual of some sort on the stack, we remand that. But that play basically loses on the spot to just them having a 4th land in hand, so we definitely shy away from that kind of maneuver. Fortunately for us, they don't have the 4th land, so we don't have to Abrupt Decay on our main phase. We draw a Pulse and a Nexus. Not exactly ideal draw steps at this point in the game, but with 5 mana up, we can just go to our opponent's turn. They're going to replay the Brawl. We get to snap remand it, and on their end step, fetch a tapped Shockland. Because of the remand, they're at 8 cards in hand, so they're going to have a cleanup step and discard a Past in Flames, which we're actually quite happy about because unless they have an almost unbeatable critical mass of cards, this is an excellent position. The card Remand is very powerful against flashback effects, and the flashback cost on Past in Flames does cost more than the front half, and that is very relevant. And almost as if it were fate, on our turn, we untap, play our 6th land, and draw a Remand. This gives us exactly enough mana to Remand and Mystical Teachings, and I'm feeling pretty good about where this game is going, especially if they don't hit the 4th land on this following turn. On their turn, they play their Baral again. We kind of just stick with the same plan of Remand it, because if they hit the 4th land and play it, we have that Abrupt Decay just to sling main phase, or even end step now, because it's the same situation as 2 turns ago, except we have 2 or 3 more lands in play. But they don't, so we get to Teachings on end step for Cryptic Command. Little awkward with the basic, but this does leave us the Cryptic, counter their spell, bounce Snapcaster, and still have Abrupt Decay castable all in one turn. And I think if we get through a turn after proceeding with that line, we're essentially 100% to win the game. And so it plays out as such. They cast Brawl for like the 4th time. We're going to Cryptic counter it, pick up our Snapcaster Mage, and have Abrupt Decay mana up. Don't even need to spend the Abrupt Decay because they once again missed their 4th land, which has made this game pretty easy, but it's how it goes. We play our 8th land on our turn, count up our mana, think about what we can do. We could just Nexus of Fate to kind of explore, but considering we already have action in Snapcaster plus a stocked graveyard and an Abrupt Decay in hand, there's no real point to do that. We might as well just hold it until we have either a really serious glut of mana or something else to do and gain a little bit more value out of it than just explore. Back on our opponent's turn, they attempt to resolve Brawl for a 5th time. We're going to snap Cryptic Command, counter it, bounce Snapcaster Mage. I actually think this might have been a mistake. We probably should have just snap remanded it, because once again, what are they going to do? Tap out and replay it? That's not a big deal to us. And had we remanded it instead, we could cast a Mystical Teachings and pull farther ahead instead of kind of not doing that so much. I think we kind of tunneled in on wanting the remand in our graveyard for the potential Gifts Ungiven that's going to come at some point if we don't kill them. And that's probably why we made that decision. I do think that was a mistake, though. Should have spent the remand there for sure and fired off Mystical Teachings for presumably another Cryptic Command, or maybe even a Blue Sun Zenith, because we could, on the following turn, if they present something relevant, we could Teachings and Cryptic all in one turn. But alas, that's not the line we took, so come our turn, we're going to spend the Nexus now because I don't feel as insulated with only access to Remand. Fetch to pull a land out of our deck, which isn't something I normally consider worthwhile, but when you're drawing so many cards every single game, it does become worthwhile much faster than usual. Our opponent still sitting on a miserable 3 lands to our, 9 or 10. They're going to opt on their turn, finally hit their 4th land, which will promptly enter tapped. And on their end step, I'm going to flashback Mystical Teachings. Now, this is an opportunity for them, because they see I have 3 mana open and they know I have a Snapcaster, to maybe go for a Ritual Morphos Gifts Ungiven play, which we have stone covered with the Spell Snare. Instead, they try and unsubstantiate our flashback Teachings, which Spell Snare also cleanly covers. So great Spell Snare value there. That's just good deck building. It takes us a little while to pick a card for Mystical Teachings. My first instinct was Cryptic Command, but I think I eventually went with Blue Sun Zenith. I think my logic was we already have the ability to Teachings for a counterspell if we need to, and if we just resolve a Blue Sun for really any value above like 3, the game will functionally end. Probably wrong. Probably should have gotten a Cryptic Command. I regret that decision. I also regret tapping my Field of Ruin. Would have been worthwhile to get that colorless source off the battlefield. Our opponent leads off their next turn with a Pyretic Ritual, and noteworthy, not a cost reducer. So here they've started to spew. They're going to continue to try and spew. So we get to build a stack of Snapcaster, Spell Snare on the Pyretic Ritual. They're going to let us resolve the Snapcaster and target something before they then place their next spell on the stack, which is correct out of them, although it doesn't matter. The second Snapcaster is going to target the Remand and remand whatever their second ritual is. The Spell Snare will wind up countering the first one, so they'll have tapped 4 mana and gotten nothing done. After all this, I wind up drawing a Fatal Push off the Remand, and I consider Fatal Pushing a Snapcaster Mage of my own on end step with Pulse of Marasa in hand, so on the next turn I could pulse back my Snapcaster, which would leave me with 6 mana untapped, which is enough to Teachings for either a Remand or probably more likely the Logic Knot. However, I do the math and realize that having 2 Snapcasters in play functionally makes it a 3-turn clock because I 4 them to 11, and then I 4 them to 7, and then I 7 them with the 2 Snapcasters and the Creeping Tar Pit. So I elect not to make that play. Draw land on our turn, ship the Snapcasters in, and here's what I was talking about earlier when I said I'm going to be playing kind of loose here. I was talking to myself in the past for the future, which is now, and I just clicked through my turn and didn't play my land. So at this point, they are going to follow their same plan as last turn and go off, and we're inclined to let them because I can't really picture an exact series of cards that gets there if the Past in Flames in their yard is part of the plan at all without a cost reducer at the beginning of it, and they didn't play one. So they fire off Ritual, Morphos, Cantrip, Ritual. It all just is going to lead into a attempt at a Past in Flames, and we will Mystical Teachings up a copy of Remand, and they will concede. So for sideboarding, we take out the Devour Flesh and Assassin's Trophy, as they are the worst removal spells, especially with Empty the Warrens being a possibility. We also remove the Pulse of Marasa because our life total is largely irrelevant. We're either going to have an answer to Empty or we're not, and if they're going off the Grape Shot and they get to that point, they're going to be able to kill us with a Grape Shot. We also get to trim down on a couple of pieces of excess fat that cost too much, especially on the draw, in Nexus of Fate, Cryptic Command, and Wilderness Reclamation. And we also go down a land in Field of Ruin. We're going to bring in the copy of Echoing Decay because it cleanly answers Empty. Shadow of Doubt because they're trying to search their library with Gifts Ungiven, and that's pretty serious blowout, 2 for 1 at a minimum, if there was no rituals spent, which there often are. Surgical Extraction is a pretty obvious one here. Additional Fatal Push because it's just a better piece of removal than the Assassin's Trophy. Nimble Obstructionist actually pulls pretty serious duty in this matchup. Being able to stifle a Storm Trigger often kind of just kills them. And the 2 copies of Dispel because all the rituals, tutors, basically everything except for Grape Shot, Empty, and a couple of the cantrips are instants. So that's the majority of what we care about. So Dispel is great. So for game number 2, this opening hand is great. It's not perfect because we're missing a green source, but with 2 draw steps and an opt, presumably that shouldn't be too tall of an order. And as far as opening 7s go against Storm, this is just about as good as we're going to get. Our opponent leads on a Serum Visions, which is just about what we would expect out of their turn 1. And we are going to lead on the Creeping Tar Pit. No need to hold up Dispel here. I guess if they turn to us and we could have gotten out of that with a Dispel, then so be it. But we want, after not drawing a land, to have the ability to go basic island, opt, searching for Fatal Push, and have black mana up off the Creeping Tar Pit to Fatal Push a potential cost reducer on turn 2 out of our opponent. Now that's not what happened. They just fire off another Serum Visions and then shock themselves to fire off a third Serum Visions. but that was why we took that line. And having Remand up on turn 2 guaranteed with what's in our hand is better than casting Opt on turn 1, in addition to that other justification I provided. We wind up drawing not a land again, and the Fatal Push. This isn't actually that bad, honestly, because we have Push and Dispel up. But fortunately for us, our opponent just plays a tapped Shockland, so we get to opt with Dispel up and find a untapped green source. So on our turn, we shock it in and draw the Shadow of Doubt, which is pretty excellent here. I mean, we've got interaction and proactive plays, and we can cast them both on any given turn going forward. So it looked a little scary for a moment, but it really came together as best as we possibly could have hoped for. And opt from our opponent on their 4th turn, followed up by their 4th land, so already doing better than the first game from their perspective. And then they fire off a Pieces of the Puzzle. Just for the tempo here, because we don't have a land guaranteed off Growth Spiral, we're going to remand this. If we had a land, I probably would have let it through, and then... Actually, I would not have. I definitely would have just Growth Spiraled and then remanded it, but without the guarantee, probably better just to remand it, because that's the more important half of that play. We wind up drawing into the 4th land anyway, so that means turn 4 Wilderness Reclamation, uncontested, no open mana from them, and at this point, we're where we were a turn ago, even on mana, or even on lands in play, and just multiple pieces of interaction we can cast, but every turn going forward is going to be a bad time for them. They recast that Pieces of the Puzzle that we remanded, and I probably should have Growth Spiraled in response because I'm doing it anyway, and if we hit a remand or a Logic Knot or something, that would have been sick, but I didn't do that. They get a couple of spells and bin a couple of brawls, which is decent. And much like in the first game, it's too early to try and extract value out of this Whispers of the Muse. Just fire it off unless you draw it in a later scenario. So we do that and shoot it off immediately, drawing into an opt, which is excellent. Rather than just firing off the opt, we're going to fire off a Growth Spiral. Reason being, we have 2, so if we brick on the land, it's not that big a deal. We basically just cycled it, and that's fine. And I want to have Dispel up. I do not want to put it... I don't want to tap out, because they have the ability to go like Ritual, Gifts Ungiven on the end step there if I tap out, which I just don't want to give them that opportunity, whether or not it's a good play. And we're going to have all kinds of excess mana going forward just because of how a Wilderness Reclamation functions. So as you see here, we go to our end step, make a bunch of mana, and now we can just safely shoot off the opt and do whatever we want. Opt finds this Cryptic, which is fantastic draw. We can shoot off the other Growth Spiral, draw another Cryptic. 5 mana is enough for Cryptic to spell. We're sitting in a fantastic spot, and it's going to be a tough road for our opponent going forward. On their next turn, they start off with a Ritual, and I feel as though I'm incentivized here to let them kind of fire a bunch of stuff off because we have 2 pieces of interaction, and they didn't lead with a Cost Reducer. They then follow up with Cost Reducer, which kind of makes sense. There's Storm Hands where like that 1 extra mana off the first Ritual kind of ensures them the ability to do multiple extra things after the cost-reducing creature comes down, so that's fine. We're going to let it stick, and with only 4 cards left in hand, we're going to kind of just continue to let them shoot off into the wind. Empty the Warrens is kind of the worst-case scenario, but, I mean, with 2 Cryptic Commands and a Snapcaster in our hand, we've got, like, minimum 5 turns here to just continue digging through our deck and doing whatever it is we need to do. On their end step, Fatal Push comes in and takes Brawl out of the equation. If they decide to go for some end step stuff here, we obviously still have that covered. And we draw Mystical Teachings, which, I mean, is a fortunate draw, but like I said, we had like half a dozen turns worth of tapping their team and whatever elsing with cryptic commands and snapcasters. So I wouldn't look into this as like a lucky outcome for a game. We're pretty likely to see something relevant in the top like 8 cards, you know. But Mystical Teachings makes it really easy. We just get to go grab the Echoing Decay and blow up all of their gobos. With the floating mana, 5 lands in play, it's definitely better to just do it now, so we still have Cryptic Command mana up on their turn. Or like Snap Echoing Decay, or Shadow of Doubt. Just having 4 lands in play untapped is much better than 3. They're immediately going to start firing off rituals again, so my first thought is there's just another empty coming, which would be fantastic because then they would lose. Because we're going to let that happen and then Snap, kill all the goblin tokens again. They're going to have like, 1 card in hand to our 2 cryptic commands, Dispel. It's just not a winnable position, especially if we're even just attacking them for 2 every turn with the Snapcaster Mage. And that's exactly how it pans out. So they are pretty much dead at this point. There was one more noteworthy decision made this game. I could go for it end step and just deal with other stuff, but 4 mana untapped, 1 card in hand kind of feels like potential gifts, which would be really their only inroad back into this game. And with Wilderness Reclamation giving us lots of extra mana, I elect to just pass to myself. And then on my own end step with 6 mana floating and all my lands untapped, go for the Snap Decay on all their guys. The only card I can draw that punishes me here is exactly Blue Sun Zenith, because I'd want all the mana to cast it on myself ASAP. But, it's like a 1 card in my deck kind of draw. So rather than, I decide not to open myself up to them resolving a single spell for the rest of the game in a potential Gifts Ungiven. And make that play on my own turn. Turns out the last card in their hand was actually Remand, so had we gone for that play on their end step with only the 4 mana untapped, we would have gotten super blown out. Amusingly, I probably made the play for that reason rather than the gifts thing, because we knew about the Remand from the pieces of the puzzle earlier on in the game. So that's going to wrap up this replay commentary of Wilderness Teachings against Storm. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or especially any sort of criticisms you'd like to share, please share them in the comments. And I guess I will see you in the next one.